Hello friends, welcome to my first wrap-up video of 2023. I'm Hannah. I have lost the plot a little bit this month, but not too badly. So January has been a really good reading month so far for me, actually. I read 11 books. I think half of them were on audio because I've had quite a lot of reading to do kind of that is work related, which I may talk about at some point on the channel, but yeah, a lot of my physical reading time has been taken up using that, so I've been reading a lot more audiobooks, which I've been really enjoying. I've popped, or I haven't yet popped, I will pop up here the moods and genres that I've read so far in January. It's funny with the moods, I don't know why funny is so prevalent here. I don't really think I've read that many funny books. I am not used to that being one of my top 3 moods. I am a challenging, dark, reflective, emotional reader, generally speaking. So there you go. That's been January. And we've read a lot of literary this year and a real kind of mix of books. So without further ado, let me talk you through them. I'm going to go just in order of when I finished them. So we're actually starting with an audiobook. The first book I read this year was If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga, and I listened to this on audio and it was narrated by the author and Amin El Gamal. This was an interesting book that I have still not made up my mind on. Ostensibly, for the first 2/3 of the book, it is about 2 characters, a man and a woman. The woman is Egyptian American, so she grew up in the States and has come to Cairo to sort of try and find herself, I guess, a bit, but she feels very kind of torn between 2 cultures. She's not Western enough back in the States and too Western in Cairo. So she's the principal character, I would say. And then the other kind of main character in the book is a young man who has grown up in rural Egypt, I think just outside of Cairo, and is trying to sort of make his way in the big city. I really went on a journey with this book because it took me a while to get into it. The style is quite fragmented at first, and it chops and changes between the perspectives of the 2 characters, which I think I found a bit challenging on audio at first to really it didn't feel like I was spending long enough with each character. It kind of felt a little bit confusing, but then I kind of settled into the story. Eventually, the characters meet, the story essentially covers their meeting each other, a relationship forms, and then the relationship terminates. And it's really interesting. Parts of it was so fascinating in that process because they have cultural differences, even though they're both Egyptian. Their brand of Egyptian is slightly different, and there's lots of really interesting commentary around money and around power dynamics in relationships and around gender, and that was all really interesting. And then there is a 3rd part to this book, which if you have read it, you will know what I mean. It comes from nowhere, and it's very essential. It's so hard to talk about because I do think if I say what it is, it will utterly ruin the book for you. So I don't want to do that. But essentially, the 3rd part reframes the narrative that has gone on previously in a way that, on the positive side, raises lots of interesting questions around who owns stories and who is allowed to speak on whose behalf, and all of that is fascinating. But on the other hand, felt kind of self-indulgent and self-congratulatory. It was interesting. I think I would have preferred to read it in a physical copy so that I could flick back it between the parts. I think that would have enriched my reading experience of it. So yeah, it's been a month now since I finished that book, and I still don't know how I feel about it, but I do think Noor Naga is a great writer, and I would definitely read whatever she puts out next, because there was enough in there that made me think this is really interesting. I'm not 100% sold on it. If you've read this book, please can we talk about the third part somewhere not where everyone can see, because I don't want to spoil it for people if they haven't. So the second book that I read was another audiobook. This was Temporary by Hilary Leichter and was narrated by Carly Robbins. This was a ride. It was, I've spoken before, I swear I am not sponsored in any way by Scribd, but what I like about an audiobook platform like Scribd is that because you don't pay per title, you can really take some chances on books. And I picked this book because I really liked the cover. I thought it looked interesting. That's why I picked this up. And I was quite unprepared for how bananas it is. At its core, this is a book that essentially follows the protagonist, who is a temporary worker. She's a temp. And the world in which she exists is a sort of version of our world. But where the associations of temporary and permanent work have been heightened to an absurd degree. And so there are these temp agencies that exist that aim to help you find permanence, as if it is, enlightenment. But the jobs that this character gets, it starts relatively simple. She's been sent in for to be like a chair of a meeting, I think, or like a chair of governors, which is like kind of a senior role to bring a temp into, but I guess, sure, sometimes you have to temp big jobs. But it gets increasingly bizarre and absurd. At one point, she temps as a pirate. At another point, she temps as a barnacle, as in an actual barnacle on a rock. And it's utterly crackers. There were parts of it that I really enjoyed, and I'm sure Hilary Leichter was saying really interesting things about our approach to work and the value that we place on our jobs, and how much of our identity gets bound up in what we do for a living and whether or not we've got that quite right. And also, the job impermanence and the structures that should be in place to support people who can't find full-time employment and all that stuff. But it was so odd. I don't really know. I don't really know if I could tell you exactly what she was communicating, because if you are a person that has a high threshold for whimsy, I think you would really get on with this book. And I think it really, it tested me. So I liked lots of parts of it. She's a really interesting, funny writer. She is one of the reasons I think that funny was so high on my moods list. But I don't know. For me, I think I got so distracted by all of that I was missing the point sometimes of the wider narrative, I guess is what I'm saying. But it was an absolute romp. The next book I read this year was my favourite that I read this month, and I'm so pleased because it was a book that I had internally hyped so much, and it is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. I've been wanting to read this book for ages. A lot of people who I follow on BookTube and people who I know in real life had read it and loved it and told me that I would love it, and I had hyped it to such a degree that I was a bit scared to start it, but oh my god, was it everything I thought it was going to be. It was amazing. So this follows a married couple, Miri and Leah. Leah has, prior to the start of the book, she's a biologist, but she's fascinated by the deep sea, and she has gone on a mission down in a submarine. I think like super far down, maybe the furthest people have ever been. And Miri is left on land, and Leah's submarine disappears, or they lose contact. The command center kind of company who have arranged the mission lose contact with their submarine, and it has been months. At the start of the book, it's been months since they lost contact, and so Miri is in this weird place where she is part grieving and part hopeful. By this point, the company have stopped kind of taking her calls and are no longer giving her updates. When it first happened, they were calling and reassuring her, and now they've gone very silent, and Miri has no idea what's going on. And so that's kind of the setup for the start of the book. And then Leah comes back, just all of a sudden, with no preamble or warning. She gets a call to say, they're back, they've resurfaced, you can come and pick her up now. And so Miri, who has been sort of feeling grief and worry and concern, goes and picks up her wife, but it becomes very, very clear that she is not the same. She is withdrawn. She's not talking about what happened, which obviously, you know, at first Miri's like, it was probably traumatic. She's probably got PTSD. But then she starts having increasingly long baths, and her body is changing in a way that doesn't feel right. And it is so good. I underlined so much stuff in here. It is utterly beautifully written. It's told in split perspective. So although we mostly follow Miri, we do have parts of the book that are told from Leah's perspective, and it alternates between them. And so we are in the submarine when they lose connections, and it is horrible and claustrophobic and tense. But I just think I think Julia Armfield is a master at character, and all of the characters felt incredibly detailed. Even the kind of side characters that are around were so well drawn. And I do think it is essentially a book that explores grief, because even when Leah returns, Miri is still grieving for the wife that she had, because Leah is no longer the wife that she had, and that has all sorts of parallels in lives and relationships of all kinds of shapes and sizes. And I just thought it was wonderful, just so wonderful. So that was book number 3. Book number 4, okay, the next few I'm not going to talk about in tons of detail, because I wrapped up these 4 books in a reading vlog that I filmed a couple of weeks ago, which I will link in the description box down below if you kind of want to hear a little bit more. But so the first of those books is a non-fiction book. I read this on my e-reader, and it was The Empire at Home by James Trafford. This is a political non-fiction book. I picked it up to buddy read it with my friend Anna, who and we started it months ago. I don't think Anna ever finished it. It took me a real long time to finish it. It's very, very dense. It's one of those books that I kind of see in shops all the time and think, oh, I should read that. I should read that because I want to be informed and I want to understand more. But oh my God, man, was this hard work. I can't even tell you what the main sort of thrust of argument in the book was. It was very theoretical, and for me it really lacked some tangible examples of some of these theoretical things that he was talking about, because essentially he's talking about really interesting stuff, which is essentially how the hangover of imperialism and colonialism is still rife within the UK today, and how it is playing out across our country and abroad, but predominantly at home, hence Empire at Home. And I desperately want to know more about that, but I couldn't get on with the writing style. It made me feel really stupid, and yeah, was not for me in the end, which is sad. Something that was the opposite of that was The Forge and the Flood by Miles Nelson, which I read with my queer book club. This is also by Miles is a local author. He's from Durham, and I had said at the start of this year that I wanted to read more books by local authors. So I was really pleased when this was the book club pick for January. Again, I talk about this book in more detail in that reading vlog. It's sweet, is I think what I will say about this. I think it was too sweet for me, but the context of this book is that it is based on a story that Miles wrote for his wedding to his husband, Chris. And so that kind of like sets up that it's going to be sweet, it's going to be romantic, it's not going to be high in peril, because that's not what people want at a wedding. But it was, I thought it was sweet. It was very outside of my comfort zone for books. It, as I said, I keep using the word sweet. God, someone give me a thesaurus. It was very wholesome. It was very lovely. I would not hesitate to read this to a child. But for me, I would have liked higher stakes. Essentially, it follows two characters. This is an Ailura, which is essentially like a red panda, called Sienna, and this is a kind, they're called Lutra, but sea otter, called Indigo. The Ailura's home becomes, due to sort of climate breakdown and aggressive exploitation of the land, becomes inhospitable for them, and so they are in search of a new home. And so these two species meet and have to try and work out how to get along with each other. They have very different views on lots of things. The Lutra live on this lush, beautiful, hippie, queer paradise where everyone is like great, and the Ailura are very their lives have been incredibly difficult at the time that they meet the Lutra. Basically their lives have been about existence and survival, and so they come at life from two very different perspectives. It was sweet, but it's not like gonna be a firm favourite, but it was lovely to support a local writer, and Miles came to our book club, and he's just the loveliest man. And him and his husband run a queer bookshop in Durham called Bookworm. So if you are ever in the region, go and support them because they're lovely. Then we have an audiobook. I listened to Castle in the Air by Diana Wynne-Jones. This is the second in the Howl's Moving Castle series of kind of middle grade fantasy, and it's narrated by Kristen Atherton. I listened to Howl's Moving Castle last year for the first time and really, really enjoyed it. I loved all the characters. And so I found this one a little bit disappointing because although it exists in the same universe and the characters are there towards the end of the book, it was essentially a whole new host of characters. And so I was just a little bit disappointed not to spend more time with the characters that I had previously really, really liked. And again, I talk about that in the reading blog, so I'm not going to say too much more about it, but it was lovely, it was fine, it was charming, it was a good middle grade book, but I definitely didn't like it as much as I liked Howl's Moving Castle. Next up is a essay collection by James Baldwin, Notes of a Native Son. This is the first James Baldwin that I have ever read. And I'm not sure it was the best introduction to his writing, which is absolutely, these are clearly very, very well written essays, but they weren't originally written to be a collection. They kind of were bits and pieces that he'd written, and then they got published together. And a good chunk, particularly of the first half of the collection, are responses to kind of cultural goings on or books or films that I just didn't know much about. And so I could only really kind of access a lot of what he was saying in quite a superficial way for a number of the essays. But that being said, there were some in here that were more essay memoir. Particularly there was one, I actually think it's the title essay, about the death of his father, and that was brilliant. And there was another one, is it Stranger? An Equal in Paris, which is about when he moved to Paris because he moved to Paris in the 50s, I think. And that was really, really interesting. But it did give me enough of a flavour of his writing to make me even more excited to get to his fiction eventually, because it's beautifully written. He's got this, he's got a lovely tone. It's sort of, you get the impression that everything is being said with a slight raised eyebrow and cock of the head, but in a way that's charming. But yes, so really enjoyed parts of this, but definitely made me want to get to his novels soon. Giovanni's Room especially is one that I'm very keen to get to soon, so I'll have my eyes peeled in the charity shops for a copy of that. Then book number 8. This was one that I saw my friend Evie had read and liked, and we have very similar taste in books, and so when I saw it on Scribd, I was like, ooh, Evie's just read that and she liked it, so let me give it a go. And it's Little Scratch by Rebecca Watson, and Rebecca Watson does the audiobook narration, and I'm so glad I read this as an audiobook, because it weirdly felt like that was the medium it had been written for. It's written in a very stream of conscious style, and it follows one day in the life of a young woman who has been the victim of a sexual assault in the workplace, and is very much struggling to suppress that memory, and she's trying to find a way to navigate her life with the trauma of that. And at some points it was like, I think you would like this if you are a fan of Fleabag, because it had that same mix of, some parts of it were very funny and some parts of it were just horrifying. But it was really, really effective. And like I said, listening to it on audio, because you are inside her head and you literally hear her trying to repress intrusive thoughts and trying to engage normally and act normally while all of this other stuff is going on in her head. And I thought it was really, really well done. I'd be very interested to read whatever Rebecca Watson puts out next. But obviously, given that that is what the topic of the book is, do read content warnings carefully if you think that that might be an issue for you. Next up is another audiobook, and this one was so sad in ways that I did not expect. It was All Among the Barley by Melissa Harrison. This was read by Helen Ayers. This follows a young girl called Edie Mather. She lives on a farm in Norfolk, and it is 1933 when the action of the book takes place. And I have read previously Melissa Harrison's nature writing, her non-fiction nature writing, and thought it was beautiful. This is the first of her fiction that I've read. And it was so lovely to see that all of that attention to detail and beautiful kind of lyricism that she brings to her nature writing, she can also do really, really well to character and plot. This was a slow-moving, for the most part, gentle coming-of-age story that is set, obviously, between the two world wars. And there is this masterfully built sort of sense of dread that just sort of slowly builds as the book progresses. It is largely brought on by a character, a kind of outsider character who comes to their village, called, she's got some like absolute posho name. What is it? Constance Fitzallen. And she is a kind of wealthy socialite type woman who very much has this romanticized idea of what country living is, and what agricultural life is. And she sort of arrives in the village. She's writing these kind of pieces for the Spectator or something. And she doesn't like that certain people in the community have embraced technology and aren't doing things in the traditional way, and that we should be conservative with a small c about, and a big C, about our agricultural practices and traditions and our history. And it was a fascinating kind of look at all of that, the class tensions, the tensions between urban and rural, attitudes between, you know, who gets to decide how those traditions are kept. Because yes, it's very quaint to hand churn butter. It's also exhausting for the people who have to do it. And so what traditions is it okay for us to let go, and what is it not? But beyond that, there is Edie is I think she's about 16 at the point in the book, and she is, something traumatic has happened to her that she is trying to grapple with. And also there are ideas circulating through various characters. And you can see the kind of path towards far-right thinking is being built. And you could see the road towards Mosley happening. And I had been warned by my friend Evie again that, because when I told her I was reading it, she was like, oh, I think you'll really like it, but it's the saddest book I've ever read. And I was like, okay, I'll prepare myself. And it was sad, but in a way that I completely did not see coming. And I had been gearing myself up for all kinds of things that might be sad, and this book still managed it. So even though I was prepared for sadness, I was not prepared for this type of sadness. I do think it was brilliant though, like really excellent, and Melissa Harrison is going to become one of my faves. I think she's just so good. So penultimate book was another one that I really, really enjoyed. And this is my second Northeast author. So this is Cecily by Annie Garthwaite. Annie Garthwaite is a writer from Hartlepool, up here in the Northeast, and this is her debut novel. I went to an online book event that New Writing North did with Annie, where she was talking about this book, and I'd read about half of the book when I went to that event, so it was really interesting because it had meant that I was able to sort of form some opinions on the book prior to hearing the author speak, but then I obviously had her voice in my head as I was finishing it, and it was quite nice to have those kind of two experiences. But essentially this is a historical novel, another historical novel, and the Cecily in question is Cecily Neville, who is the mother of the man who goes on to be Richard III. And Annie has basically been fascinated by this woman for pretty much her entire life since school. And not much is ever written about her. Shakespeare, whenever she appears in Shakespeare's plays, she's sort of just this doddery old religious woman, and Annie Garthwaite's like, nah, she's got to have had more about her than that. And her version of Cecily is this absolute powerhouse. She's a strategist, she's a manipulator, she loves her family fiercely but has a real kind of stiff upper lip in the face of adversity. And I thought this was like such a great read. It is really pacey though. I think my one criticism of the book is that it covers about 30 years of Cecily's life. It begins not long after she's married. It actually begins with the burning of Joan of Arc, and which Cecily was there to witness, and it ends about 30 years later. So it covers around 3 decades of the War of the Roses, pretty much, which is a lot of content. And it did at points, particularly where Cecily had maybe suffered a blow, whether it be a blow to her ambition or a grief, a loss. I would have quite liked to sit with her a little bit more at moments in the book. But I also think Cecily's character is very... she would not sit in her grief. Do you know what I mean? So I understand the authorial intent, but my preference is massively more towards slower paced books, and this was quite pacey, but I did really, really enjoy it. And Annie did say that she is working on a sequel to it because she has more of Cecily's story to tell. So I think if you are, if you like historical fiction, if you like a powerhouse female lead, and particularly if you are interested in that kind of War of the Roses coming towards the Tudor dynasty, then I recommend. And I was really pleased that I was able to read 2 Northeast authors this month. That made me very happy. And then finally we're ending on a little bit of a bummer for January. So the last book I read was also an audiobook, and it was The Atmospherians by... now, the cover says Alex McElroy, but I have seen them referred... they're a non-binary author who I've seen referred to as both Alex and Isle. At the moment, Isle is their name on Instagram, so I am going to call them Isle. But I think they use both names. This was a book... this was a bit of an experiment, to be fair. Because I picked this because Emily Tremaine narrates it, and Emily Tremaine narrated Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead, which was an audiobook that I absolutely loved last year by Emily Austen. And I thought Emily Tremaine did such a good job on the narration that I thought, I just want to listen to another book that she narrates. And I did. And there were some parts of this book that were really interesting and parts that just lost me. So it begins with the main character, Sasha, is a kind of a YouTuber, influencer, lifestyle kind of type. And she has made a comment to someone, a troll, online. And that person has then gone on to commit suicide live, like online. And so the book begins after that has happened, and Sasha is now being cancelled and doxxed and just generally harassed. Now, for me, I would read a book that's just about that, because I think there's so much in that setup and so much we can learn and uncover about people. But that is just like the prologue to this book. And I think the problem that I had with this book was that it had so many phases. It felt like it could have been like 3 novels. So the Atmospherians, what that title relates to, is after this has happened, and none of this is a spoiler because it all happens like relatively early on. Her and her best friend, well, her best friend really approaches her and says, I think I've got the solution to get you kind of back on track to fix all this stuff. And their solution is that they're going to start a cult. And that cult is going to target men with toxic behaviours. And the purpose of what a slip of the tongue. The purpose of the cult is to eradicate toxic masculinity. Again, okay, I can see where you're going with it. And then there were further iterations and further iterations of like more kind of quite like high concept ideas. And I just felt like how we navigated between those points wasn't nuanced enough or character driven enough. It felt like the author really had something to say, and they were going to jam what they had to say into a story. And that is a kind of, it's just something that kind of just, it doesn't work for me. I tend to turn off if I feel like I'm being so explicitly manipulated as a reader. If I feel like the author is too much trying to tell me what to think or how to react to things. So yeah, I think it was a shame, but I think there were lots of interesting ideas in it. And like I said, if Isle had written 3 separate books, one about the social media doxing thing, one about the cult, and one about whatever, I'm not going to talk about that because that is spoilery, but the latter parts of the book, I think I might have preferred it more. But yeah, that was not such a good one. But generally, I think I've had a jolly good January. It's been good. And I'm glad I had a good January, because February is shaping up to be a lot of work-related reading and not a lot of me-related reading. So I'm glad I've got some good ones in there. But I think Our Wives Under the Sea and All Among the Barley and Little Scratch and Cecily were all like real contenders. So thrilled with that. I would love to know what you have read in January. Have you read any books that could be like your books of the year? Have you had a good start, solid start, not so solid a start? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, if you've read any of these books, particularly if you've read If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English, I really, really desperately want to know what you think about that third part of the book, because I do not know. But yeah, have a good day doing whatever you were doing, and I'll chat soon. If you could like and subscribe, that would be lovely. If you have enjoyed this video, if you haven't enjoyed this video, you don't have to like and subscribe. I should have said those clauses the other way around. Whatever, you get it. I have to say it, but have a good day. Goodbye.